Concurrency basically involves multiple clients accessing the same data. That is not a problem if you are just retrieving data to look at it. It is a problem if you're trying to update rows. So a concurrency conflict occurs if person one retrieves a row to update. Person two retrieves the same row and they want to do an update. Okay, because somebody's going to end up with an inaccurate update. Something is going to be missing. In Entity Framework Core, you have two options for this type of scenario. There is last in wins. That is the default. Okay, so basically, person one grabs it, they go to make a change. Person two grabs it, they go to make a change. Person two submits their change, and then person one submits the change. Person one's change wins, okay, because it was the last change that was made. So one is the winner, two loses their change. Okay, so that's what last in wins means. Optimistic concurrency is something that you can configure. And you can configure it using data annotations or Fluent API. And basically, it checks to see when you pull a row for update, it kind of keeps track of what was there. And so if somebody else has pulled that row, uh, it's going to, and they've made a change and saved it. When you go to save, it knows that the row is not the same. Okay, so that's what optimistic concurrency means, that it's going to check to see if anything has changed before you do your update. So to implement this, there's two different ways you can do it. You can use a concurrency token or you can use row version property. A concurrency token is applied to specific properties, and you can implement this using data annotations or Fluent API. It's very easy to use data annotations. All you do is put concurrency check above the property that you want it to check. I would probably put it above a required property. That way, if you pull something and it's checking to see if it's changed, you know it's going to be filled in. So all you have to do if you're going to use concurrency check is put that attribute above the property you want checked. In Fluent API, this is a property level code where you'd say property, indicate which property it is, and then you'd say is concurrency token. So you're turning that on. Okay, so that's one way of checking. The other way is to use a timestamp row version. This is a little bit more complicated because you're actually adding a property to your class. And the way that you implement this is different depending on the database provider. SQL Server wants a data type of byte for this particular property, but other database providers may want this set up differently. So it's not the same for all the database providers. So if you're going to use attributes, you have a timestamp attribute, and then you have a timestamp property that has a byte data type. If you're going to set this up in Fluent API, you have to use the property method with the lambda that indicates its timestamp property that you're going to modify. And then you're turning on is row version. So this is, again, how it would look if we set this up in Fluent API. So this is where we are kind of turning that on. And then this is what our class would look like. And because we're turning this on through Fluent API, we do not need the data annotation. Now to test for concurrency. So we've talked about how to set this up, right? Okay. And to test for concurrency. And you will see this in our controllers in the update or the edit action methods. To test for the concurrency, we are going to see try and catch, and this is very typical of what you're going to see in a controller. It's going to check for the model state being valid. Then it is going to indicate that it wants to do the update. Okay, but that doesn't actually update the database. Save changes does. So here we're indicating that we are going to update, but the command that does the update is the save changes. So that is what goes in the try block. And your catch block, you are going to catch a DB update concurrency exception. And that is passing an object. And then you'll have some code to handle that. Now, what gets scaffolded by Entity Framework is something that looks like this. So here you can see we're checking the model state. And I just went ahead and kept the update in here because the save changes is right after. This is where the exception would occur. Okay. And then we've got our catch. And so basically it's saying, doesn't the location ID exist anymore? And so if it doesn't, it's not found. Otherwise, it is throwing the exception. Okay, so this was all scaffolded. Now, if you put concurrency checking into your code, how in the world can you test for that? So we can see how we're handling it, but how do we test? How do we make sure that it works? There is a command called execute SQL raw. This is a method in the context class, and you can use it to simulate concurrency checks. It actually can be used to execute SQL instead of link to SQL. So if we use execute SQL raw, we can key in SQL statements that don't have to be converted at all. So how we can use this to test for concurrency is in this example, it's finding a particular book. We're changing the book price. This change is only in memory because we have not saved anything. Then we sneak in with this execute SQL raw and we update the price. Okay, then it tries to save the changes. Well, it's not talking about these changes here. It's talking about this one that's up in memory. Okay, and between this time when we made the change to memory and down here when we're trying to actually save it to the database, we had another change sneak in. That is a concurrency error. So you can use this to simulate those errors. Okay. But just so you guys know, that command can actually be used to execute SQL code directly. I would not do that, okay, because there are some issues with error injections and hacking and that type of thing. But if the select that you want to do cannot be done, using link to SQL, then this is an alternative. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about this command, I did include a link that tells you more about it.